Hi, Gaithersburg Book Festival. Lynne Kelly here, wishing I were joining you in person, but for now, joining you online. I will tell you a little today about my latest book, Song for a Whale, and how it came to be, and some of the fun things that I discovered along the way as I was writing and researching that. I got the idea for this book when I learned about the existence of the real lonely whale, also called the 52 Hertz whale or 52 blue. This is a whale that sings a song that is not like any other. The song that he sings is a lot higher than most whales sing. And for us, it's a low sound. It's about like a low note of a tuba, but apparently for a whale, that's so screechingly high that other whales can't understand him. Well, I was fascinated right away and had to learn more about him. And so I read what I could, and we only know that he has an unusual song because of underwater microphones called hydrophones that are in the world's oceans. And this was discovered in the late 1980s. Maybe he's been out there longer, but that's the first time someone noticed this song and realized it is a whale song. It's just one that's strange. So these underwater microphones pick up all the sounds of the ocean, all the wildlife and other sounds that the ocean makes. And it also is a song that is somewhat like a blue whale song. It's somewhat like a fin whale song in the pattern, but in either case, it's still way too high. So one good guess, I think, about why this whale kind of sings his own language out there is that maybe his parents were a blue whale and a fin whale. So he's a hybrid animal, meaning he has parents that are two different species. That does happen sometimes with blue and fin whales. Those are the two largest whales, and they once in a while have calves together, not often, but it does happen. That's one good guess about why he has his own language. Could be something else about him is different. Again, like the musical instrument example, if a musical instrument is shaped differently or bent or a different size, then the sound will be different. Could be something else about him. But I found that nobody has a picture or video of this whale. We only know him because of his song. And I knew pretty quickly this was an idea that wasn't going to let me go. So I knew that I had to keep learning more and then write something about this whale. And I knew that this needed to be a story that I would write. Of course, I didn't know yet what story that would be, what would happen, but I knew that this had to be something that I would write and hopefully turn into a book. So of course I then needed my character. So who would that be? Well, my character needed to be someone who would be not just fascinated like I was when learning about this whale, but someone who would need to get up and go do something and solve a problem having to do with this whale, because we need our characters to do something and to work through a difficult problem. So I came up with the character Iris, and I knew that with her, she's someone who, when she learned about this whale, she would decide, I have to track him down. I have to find him. And I have to let him know that someone out there does hear his song in a way. And Iris is the only deaf student at her school. This is like many deaf students that I've worked with in my years as a sign language interpreter. It happens fairly often that a deaf student is the only one at school who's deaf, and maybe one of a few. So Iris feels not so much alone because she is surrounded by others, but she feels lonely anyway because it's isolating, you know, of course, being surrounded by others who don't know your language. And she feels like she has a connection to this whale because this whale also is surrounded by other ocean life, but nothing who understands his song. So she right away feels a connection and wants to find a way to track him down. And she also has a deaf grandmother. I'll get to later why I gave her a deaf grandmother in this, because that was an important part of the story. And her grandmother will get to join her on this journey that she goes on in trying to track down this whale. And I thought too, I would share with you some questions that students have sent to me or have asked me when I have visited them. One is it fun to be an author? It is fun to be an author. It is a lot of work, though. It takes a lot of time and work, but so do many things that are worth doing. So it doesn't always feel like it's fun, but I enjoy doing it. I like seeing how a story is going to unfold. How am I going to, for example, take this idea um, about a whale that can't talk to other whales, and how am I going to make that into a story? What happens in that story? And who's this character who's trying to find him? And what else is she trying to work through? So I like seeing how the story unfolds. I like trying to figure out how to show how the character is feeling, and then how to make the story more interesting as I write and as I revise. And of course, I really like seeing it when I'm finished and that it's finally a real book. That takes some time. I know I'll get to a question about that also. And then of course, when it's finally finished, I love getting to visit with readers. That's my favorite thing to do as an author. I've also had the question, is this a true story? This book is fiction, meaning I made up the story, but it is, as I've mentioned, inspired by a real animal. It's inspired by the real lonely whale. So I think a lot of times as authors, even though we make up the story, we get the idea from something in real life. And the characters, even though they aren't based on one particular person, we can give them qualities of people we have known and people we do know, and even of ourselves. They might have characteristics that we have, or maybe that we wish that we had too. So it is a fictional story that I made up, but inspired by a real animal. And another question I get is the whale still out there? That's a question we don't know. I really hope so. But the scientists who did listen for this whale and write about this whale have not heard him lately. It's been a few years since they have heard him. I wrote to one of the scientists who have written about him, and he said, we haven't heard him for a few years, but we're not actively listening for him anymore. It's not one of their projects that they do. So because they're working on other things and not looking for him really, then we don't know for sure. I really hope so. I know there are people who want to find him. Hopefully someone will track him down and will know, and will know more about his background and what he is, and maybe why he sings like he does. So we don't know for sure. Also, sometimes they had noticed that he would just go quiet for some time. I have that in the book too. So a lot of things that I found ended up in the book. Other times he might be too far from these hydrophones, those underwater microphones, for anyone to hear him. So that could be the case also. He also has a strange migration route. He doesn't follow kind of the same path, for example, Alaska to Hawaii and back, like most whales do when they go from warm water to cold water, depending on the season. He has more of he has a different route every year, really, is what they found when they mapped out where the songs were. It was just a strange path that he takes, because it's different every year too. So I have my character Iris finding that too, and wondering not just what are you singing, but what are you looking for. So it's kind of hard to predict where he is. I hope he's out there, and just no one is hearing him right now. I hope he's still singing too, if he is out there. So yeah, that is a good question. I wish I knew the answer to. And I mentioned this, I was going to get back to why I decided to make Iris's grandmother deaf. Um, for most deaf people, they are the only deaf person that their families know. For most deaf people, their deafness is not hereditary. So there's no one else in the family who's deaf. So often they have those same communication barriers they have at school. It's also at home, because their families don't know sign language. Hopefully they learn it so they can communicate better with them, and they find ways to communicate with each other, but still it's not as easy to interact as it is for those of us who share the language that our families do. And so for her, I did want to make her one of the small percentage of deaf people who do have deaf family members who have hereditary deafness. One, so she'd have a mom who knows sign language well, because she grew up with deaf parents. Also, so we could see what her relationship is like with her grandmother, and how different that life is, that part of her life is. When I wrote this, I was thinking it was really important for me to avoid Iris looking like she was someone who would ever say, oh, poor me, I'm a deaf girl, I wish I could hear. I didn't want that. And that's been the case for almost every deaf person I've known, if not every deaf person. They wouldn't want to change who they are. And being deaf is a big part of who they are. So even though there would be frustrations and there are challenges along the way, that's not something they want to change about themselves. And so I wanted that to be clear. And, you know, a lot of people reading this are not familiar with deafness or sign language. And if she had no one to talk to at school and nobody to talk to at home, they might think, oh, of course she would want to hear, because how horrible is this that she can't talk to anyone? And I didn't want anyone to get that impression that she wishes that she were not deaf. So I could show that by giving her a deaf grandmother. So then we see the difference when she is with her deaf grandmother, and then having flashbacks to when her grandfather was around, also deaf, what that part of her life was like and how joyful that was and how satisfying that is when she's with someone who understands her experience and someone who does share her language and her history, and they can have their jokes and their stories that they tell with one another, that they tell in sign language. So in that, we get an idea of what a difference it is when she does have someone who shares that experience. Also, through her deaf friend Wendell, when she visits his school that has a lot more deaf kids, then we see what she could have, and she sees what she could have. She gets a glimpse of that, what it would be like if she could, you know, sit in the cafeteria and actually talk to the students around her and in the halls, and teachers in the classrooms, if she could easily talk to them and sign with them. Then it really hits her what she could have if she could only go to this school like she wants to do. So that's one thing that she's working through too, is how to stand up for herself and ask for what she needs. Often in a book, maybe always, there's the story that we see happening, there's the adventure they're going on, there's the plot of the book. But there's something else happening that's deeper than that. So there's something happening within the character too. It's a journey that the character doesn't even know that they're on. So there's something more about them that they have to work through. So I'm thinking for Iris, what she has to face is this really about the whale so much? Is it true that he really needs her to go find him and tell him she hears this song? Or is this something about her, that she's the one who needs to be heard? So I have her kind of working through that also, that perhaps she needs to be standing up for herself. A lot of students wonder how long it takes to write a book. And that is something that can vary wildly. It's different for every book, it's different for every author, but know that any book you see on a shelf of a library or bookstore or classroom took some years to make. For me, it was about 3.5 years from the idea to finished book like this. That's really not a long time in publishing. Things don't move very quickly, and it takes a long time to write a book, probably takes longer to revise that book. And then publishers are busy and they have other books ahead of this that they need to work on and get out there. There's the lovely cover art to do too. They find a good illustrator to do that. So many things take time. And so any book takes some number of years, and also many people working on it. It was about a year from that idea until I had a good strong draft that I felt like was ready to send to editors. It's not just writing the draft and sending it, it's many drafts, and it's a lot of revising along the way. So some on my own, and some with feedback from other authors who read chapters or even read the whole thing and give me some feedback I can work with to make it the best book I can before I send it out there. And then, there's time to find the right editor, time for editors to read it and to say yes or no. And then even after the right editor says, yes, let's do it, let's make this a book, well, that editor will want more revision too. And so that takes some time. And it's not, when I say revision, it's not small stuff like fix the commas or the spelling. That's small stuff that's easy to do. Revisions at this level are things like maybe this character doesn't seem strong enough. Can you work on making this character stronger? It can be that this chapter needs another scene. It can be like this scene or maybe this whole plot needs to go, so delete that. Even a character, get rid of them. So those are harder revisions to do. And so then even after an editor does take it on and say, yes, let's publish this, well, then it's 1.5 to 2 years before it is a finished book that's on the bookshelves. So then it's even more time to wait than after you're all finished, and the revisions can take a long time, seemingly forever. It can go on, but then finally then it's a real book and students are reading it. And then again, my favorite thing is getting to talk to those readers about the book and some of the behind the scenes stuff along the way. So yeah, so for that one, about 3.5 to 4 years from that idea that I got about that whale, and then finished book. So yes, it is. So back to the question about, is it fun to be an author? Again, a lot of work and it takes time, but it's so worth doing. And again, this is my favorite thing, to get to visit with readers, when I can't see you in person, at least on a video, so I can talk more about the story. And I do hope to see you in person at an event in the future. And until then, I hope you all stay safe and well. Thanks so much for having me.